The apology never came the way she had imagined it would. In her mind, it had always arrived softly, late at night, spoken with regret, wrapped in the kind of sincerity that makes wounds ache before they heal. But instead of apology, what she received 5 years ago was silence sharpened into humiliation. The day it happened, the city was alive with celebration. Lanterns glowed along the streets, music drifted from open halls, and people gathered to witness what was meant to be a proud moment for him. She stood beside him then, not as a guest, not as an observer, but as the woman who had once believed she mattered. That belief shattered in public. He did not shout, he did not accuse her with anger. He did something far worse, he dismissed her with composure. When questions were raised about her place in his life, about promises whispered long ago, he smiled faintly and said words that echoed louder than any insult. "That was a misunderstanding," he said. "She waited on her own. I never asked her to." Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite and cruel all at once. Heads turned toward her, curiosity sparkling in their eyes. She felt the heat rise to her face, but she did not move. She did not speak. She stood there as her devotion was reduced to foolishness, as 5 years of loyalty were rewritten as obsession. That was the moment everything changed. She had waited for him before, through long absences, unanswered letters, delayed promises. She had waited believing patience was proof of love, that understanding was strength. When others warned her, she defended him. When doubts crept in, she silenced them. She told herself that not everyone loves loudly, that some people show commitment through ambition, through work, through eventual return. What she did not realize was that waiting alone creates a story only one person believes. And when that story is denied publicly, it leaves behind a scar deeper than betrayal itself. She left that gathering without drama, no tears, no confrontation. Her footsteps were steady as she walked away from the music, the lights, and the man who did not follow her. Inside, something collapsed, not loudly but completely. It was not heartbreak that hurt the most. It was the realization that she had been invisible in her own sacrifice. That waiting, when unacknowledged, becomes humiliation. That night she sat alone and replayed every moment she had defended him, every excuse she had made on his behalf, every year she had told herself soon. The memory of his voice, calm, dismissive, final, looped endlessly in her mind. I never asked her to. The words stripped her of dignity more efficiently than anger ever could. And yet even then, something inside her refused to break entirely. Instead, it hardened into resolve. She decided she would wait no longer. The cruel irony of fate is this. Even after she walked away, even after she vanished from his world, she still waited. Not in the way she once had, not with letters or hope, but with expectation buried deep beneath silence. She waited for something he never gave, an apology, not for the broken promise, but for the public erasure. For the years he allowed her to stand alone while benefiting quietly from her loyalty, for letting the world believe she was foolish rather than admitting he had been cruel. The first year after she left was the hardest. She woke each morning expecting regret to arrive in the form of a message, a visit, a confession. Every sound at the door tightened her chest. Every unfamiliar letter carried a spark of hope she hated herself for feeling. She told herself she was waiting only for closure, but hope is clever. It disguises itself as reason. The second year taught her a different lesson. Silence, when it stretches long enough, becomes an answer. Friends stopped asking about him. People moved on. Life rearranged itself around her absence from his story. Yet somewhere deep inside, she kept count, not of days, but of years. 5, she once thought bitterly. If he has a conscience, it won't take him more than 5 years. What she did not know then was that those same 5 years would transform her from a woman who waited into a woman who would never beg again. And him, he thrived, at least on the surface. His reputation remained untouched. The story he told that night became the truth society accepted. He built success upon it, never looking back, never asking what became of the woman who disappeared quietly after being laughed at. To him, the chapter had closed neatly. To her, it remained unfinished. Because apologies delayed do not fade. They accumulate interest. And when they finally arrive, if they arrive at all, they are no longer enough to be spoken softly. They must be earned painfully. This was only the beginning. She did not pack the way women do in stories, with trembling hands and sobs that stain lace. She packed the way a person does when something inside them has turned to stone. Quietly, methodically, almost politely. The candles in her room burned low, the flame bending each time the wind slipped through the window seams, and yet her hands did not shake. She folded her dresses as if she were preparing for a journey she had planned for months, not an escape from a humiliation that still rang in her ears. Outside, the city's music carried on, unaware that a life had just snapped in two. And somewhere, not far away, he was still surrounded by laughter, still wearing that calm expression he had used to erase her in front of everyone. The hardest part was not leaving. The hardest part was accepting that he would not stop her. She wrote no letter at first. Words felt useless when her dignity had already been spoken over. Instead, she stood at the small writing desk, staring at the blank page until her eyes burned, then finally took a deep breath and wrote one line, only one, because anything more felt like pleading. "I will not wait where I am not wanted." She signed her name without flourish, not because she wanted him to remember her, but because she wanted him to know that the woman he dismissed had chosen herself. She left the note on the table where his messenger would find it, not hidden, not dramatic, a clean ending. Then she went downstairs. The servants looked up as she passed, their faces shifting from confusion to concern. They had seen her for years, quiet, loyal, polite, always present, always patient. They had watched her wait through storms and seasons, watched her defend him when others mocked her devotion. Now they watched her walk through the hallway with a small bag in her hand, her posture straight, her eyes dry. She did not offer explanation. Explanations were for people who cared. Still, the oldest housekeeper stepped forward, voice shaking. "Miss, where are you going?" For a brief moment, the woman she used to be flickered behind her eyes. She wanted to say, "I'm going where I can breathe," but she only replied softly, "Somewhere I'm not laughed at." Then she stepped into the night. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to make her lungs ache. The carriage she had arranged waited at the corner, simple and unmarked. She climbed inside, pulled the cloak around her shoulders, and looked back once at the house she had treated like home for too long. She expected to feel grief. She expected her heart to scream. Instead, she felt something terrifyingly calm, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you are no longer afraid to jump. As the carriage began to move, her mind betrayed her with the one thought she hated most. What if he comes? It was foolish, but hope has no shame. For years, she had trained her heart to expect him to return, to expect him to soften, to expect him to realize she mattered. Tonight, she told herself if he had any decency left, he would stop her. He would run after the carriage, breathless, call her name, confess that he spoke those words only to protect himself, only to save face, only because he was afraid of the power she had over him. He would apologize. He would say the truth. But the street remained empty. No footsteps, no voice, no sudden knocking of a door thrown open. Only the steady rhythm of wheels over stone and the distant echo of a city that did not know it had just lost a woman who once loved too deeply. She arrived at a small house on the outskirts, an aunt's home, quiet and plain, where no one cared who she had once waited for. Her aunt opened the door and immediately understood. It was not the bag or the cloak that revealed it. It was the silence, the kind of silence that follows a breaking. Her aunt did not ask questions. She only pulled her into a warm embrace and whispered, "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt strange. She had never realized how unsafe hope could be until it was gone. That night she did not sleep. She sat by the window and watched the sky shift from black to gray, feeling each hour pass like a judgment. Every time a horse's hooves sounded in the distance, her body tensed. Every time a carriage rumbled, she held her breath. She hated herself for it. She had left. She had chosen herself. Why did her heart still look backward? Because love does not vanish on command. It fades like a bruise, slowly, painfully, changing colors before it finally disappears. At dawn, a letter arrived, but not from him. It was from a mutual acquaintance, polite and vague, mentioning that the evening had ended splendidly, that he had been in excellent spirits, that he had spoken to important guests and charmed the room. The words blurred as she read them, not because of tears, but because her vision refused to accept what her mind already knew. He had noticed her absence and continued anyway. He had watched her disappear from his life and decided it was easier to let her go than to admit she mattered. That realization settled into her bones like winter. She pressed the letter down on the table, stared at her own hands, and felt something shift again. Not heartbreak this time, but determination. If he could live without her apology, then she could live without his. Yet she did not know, she could not have known, that the moment she stepped away, she took something with her that he would not realize he needed until it was gone. Not love, not devotion, something stronger, something quieter. The foundation. Because while he slept comfortably in his reputation, she had been the one carrying the weight of his life in ways no one ever thanked her for. And now, for the first time, that weight would fall where it belonged. Back on him. And still, the apology did not come. Not that day, not that week, not that month, not even that year. He let her go, believing he had won. And she lay awake through sunrise, realizing she had finally stopped losing. The first year after she left felt endless, not because time moved slowly, but because every day required a kind of discipline she had never learned before, the discipline of not waiting. For years, her life had been structured around anticipation, waiting for messages, waiting for visits, waiting for moments when he might finally see her the way she had seen him all along. Now, with that structure gone, her days felt strangely empty, like a room after furniture has been removed. Silence followed her everywhere, not loud or dramatic, but constant. It sat beside her at breakfast, lingered in the evenings, and crept into her thoughts when she least expected it. She told herself she was no longer waiting for him. And yet, every night before sleep, some small part of her still listened for regret to arrive in the form of an apology. During that first year, she learned how dangerous memory could be. It softened the sharpest edges of humiliation and replaced them with selective tenderness. She remembered the rare smiles he had given her, the moments when his voice had been gentle, the promises that had sounded sincere in the quiet. Memory tried to convince her that she had exaggerated the cruelty, that perhaps she had misunderstood. On the hardest nights, she even questioned whether leaving had been an overreaction. But then another memory would surface. The laughter in the crowd, the way his words had been spoken calmly, without hesitation. And that memory anchored her. It reminded her that love does not require public erasure to survive. She kept herself busy not because she was strong, but because stillness felt dangerous. She helped her aunt with the household, took small responsibilities that required focus, volunteered her time where it mattered. In these ordinary tasks, she found something she had not expected, respect without conditions. People thanked her. People noticed when she was gone. The contrast unsettled her. She had spent years waiting to be acknowledged by one man, while the world quietly proved she had always been worthy of regard. The second year was different. By then, the ache had changed shape. It no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like something healing unevenly beneath the skin. She no longer woke expecting his apology, but she had not stopped counting the time. 2 years, she thought once, staring at her reflection. 2 years and still nothing. The realization hurt less than it should have, which frightened her more than pain ever had. Indifference, she was learning, arrives quietly. It does not announce itself. It simply replaces longing one morning without asking permission. It was during that second year that she began to reclaim pieces of herself she had long neglected. She read more, not to pass time, but to understand herself. She took on work that challenged her, responsibilities that required decision rather than patience. She began to speak with more certainty, to trust her own judgment without seeking approval. Each small act felt insignificant on its own, but together they formed something solid. She was no longer the woman whose worth depended on whether one man remembered her. Still, there were moments, unavoidable human moments, when the past reached for her. She heard his name in conversation once and felt her chest tighten instinctively. She learned of his continued success through distant acquaintances and wondered, briefly, whether he ever thought of her at all. That question lingered for days, not because she wanted him back, but because she wanted her suffering to have registered somewhere beyond herself. Wanting to be remembered, she realized, is often just another form of wanting validation. What changed her most in those years was not what she gained, but what she stopped doing. She stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. She stopped imagining apologies that might never come. She stopped explaining herself to people who did not ask. And slowly, without ceremony, she stopped waiting. The silence that once felt like punishment began to feel like space. Space to think, space to grow, space to decide who she wanted to be if no one ever apologized. That question reshaped her more deeply than heartbreak ever had. If forgiveness was never requested, would she still need it to move forward? The answer unsettled her at first. Then it liberated her. By the end of the second year, she could say his name without feeling exposed. She could remember the past without collapsing into it. The apology she once needed so desperately no longer felt urgent, but it had not lost its weight. It simply waited, stored away like a debt that had not expired. 5 years, she remembered thinking once, almost amused by the thought. If he ever apologizes after 5 years, it will not be for me. It will be for himself. What she did not know, what she could not yet see, was that while she was learning how to live without waiting, his world was quietly beginning to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in ways subtle enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. She was building something steady within herself. And somewhere far away, he was still walking on a foundation he did not realize she had once held together. By the third year, his life looked exactly the way success is supposed to look from the outside. His name carried weight. Doors opened when he entered rooms. Invitations arrived before he had time to request them. People spoke of his achievements with admiration, sometimes even envy, and the story of the woman who had once waited for him had faded into something trivial, an anecdote occasionally mentioned with a shrug. To the world, he had lost nothing. If anything, he had gained freedom. No expectations, no explanations, no emotional debts to repay. He told himself this often enough that it began to sound like truth. But success has a peculiar way of exposing what it replaces. Without her, his days became louder. Meetings stretched longer. Conversations felt more transactional. Applause came easily, but it ended just as quickly. There was no one left to remind him when ambition crossed into excess, no quiet voice to temper his certainty. Decisions were made faster now, sometimes too fast. He dismissed concerns he once would have paused over, mistaking decisiveness for wisdom. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cracks began to form. At first, they were minor. A partnership dissolved unexpectedly. A trusted advisor hesitated where he once agreed. A project failed to meet expectations despite impressive planning. He blamed circumstance. Then incompetence, never himself. He certainly never thought of her. Why would he? The past was settled. The waiting woman was gone. He had moved on. Yet something was missing. He felt it most in the evenings, after the noise of the day fell away. His house was fuller than ever, guests, staff, acquaintances, but emptier in the ways that mattered. Conversations ended where they once deepened. Laughter filled rooms but did not linger. There was no one to challenge him gently, no one to question his certainty without threatening his pride. The quiet he had once found suffocating now felt strangely absent. That absence showed itself in his choices. He began to rely too heavily on praise, mistaking approval for loyalty. He trusted people who mirrored his confidence rather than those who offered restraint. Deals were struck on charm rather than substance. And when warnings surfaced, soft at first, then clearer, he brushed them aside. He had built too much to doubt himself now. Admitting uncertainty felt like weakness, and weakness had no place in the life he was determined to maintain. The irony was cruel. The very qualities that had once made him impressive, ambition, confidence, independence, were now amplifying his blind spots. Without someone to balance him, to see beyond appearances, his world became increasingly fragile. He did not notice when alliances shifted, when loyalty thinned, when admiration gave way to calculation. He assumed control where he should have sought understanding. Meanwhile, she continued to live quietly, unaware that her absence had begun to matter in ways he could not yet name. By the middle of the third year, the cracks widened. A public misstep, small but noticeable, sparked whispered criticism. He responded with authority, issuing statements that sounded polished but hollow. The reassurance worked temporarily, but something had changed. People listened differently now, less generously, less patiently. They no longer filled in gaps on his behalf. For the first time, he felt exposed. It was subtle enough that he could still deny it, still convince himself that success required no apology, no reflection. Yet late at night, when the house finally grew quiet, he found himself thinking back to moments he had dismissed years ago. The way she used to listen more than she spoke. The way she noticed shifts in mood before they became conflicts. The way she questioned him not to challenge his authority, but to strengthen it. The memories surfaced uninvited, irritating, and persistent. He pushed them away. He told himself nostalgia was weakness. That regret was useless. That she had chosen to leave, and choices have consequences. But even as he repeated these justifications, the foundation beneath him continued to erode. He felt it when a negotiation failed unexpectedly, when a trusted associate withheld information, when success no longer felt secure but performative, something that had to be constantly maintained. The third year was when he began to understand loss without naming it. He did not yet feel regret. Regret requires clarity. What he felt was unease, a sense that something essential had been removed from his life without his consent. He could not articulate it, could not assign blame. All he knew was that the confidence he once wore effortlessly now required effort. And effort, when sustained too long, reveals exhaustion. He began to work harder, not smarter. He filled his schedule until there was no room left for reflection. Noise became his shield. Silence, once dismissed, now felt dangerous. In silence, memories surfaced. In silence, questions formed. And questions threatened the story he had told himself for 3 years, that letting her go had cost him nothing. What he did not know, what he could not yet see, was that while he was scrambling to reinforce a weakening structure, she was building something entirely new. Something that did not depend on his recognition. Something solid enough to withstand time without apology. The third year ended with him standing firmly in public success and quietly in private instability. The world still applauded him. His name still carried power. But beneath the surface, the balance that had once steadied his rise was gone. And for the first time since she left, the thought crossed his mind. Not sharply, not painfully, but persistently. What if losing her was not the victory I believed it to be? By the fourth year, the woman who had once counted days in silence no longer recognized the person she used to be. Waiting had shaped her once, rounded her edges, softened her voice, taught her patience at the cost of self-respect. But time, when lived rather than endured, has a way of rewriting identity. She no longer measured her worth by absence or apology. The space that had once felt hollow was now filled with intention. She woke each morning with plans that belonged entirely to her, decisions that did not orbit around someone else's approval. Independence did not arrive all at once. It arrived quietly, layered moment by moment, until one day she realized she had not thought of him at all. Her days were fuller now, not with noise, but with meaning. She had taken on work that required courage, responsibilities that tested her judgment and demanded confidence. People sought her perspective not out of politeness, but because it mattered. When she spoke, she did not rush to be understood. She trusted that clarity would find its way. The woman who once waited for permission had learned how to claim space without apology. And in doing so, she discovered something far more valuable than validation: self-trust. There were moments when the past resurfaced, as it always does, a familiar song, a street that reminded her of an evening she once spent waiting for him to arrive. But these memories no longer wounded her. They passed through her like weather, noticed, acknowledged, then released. She did not push them away, nor did she dwell on them. Healing, she realized, was not forgetting. It was remembering without losing yourself. That year, she made a decision that would have terrified her former self. She chose to be visible. Not loudly, not defiantly, but honestly. She stepped into opportunities she once believed were beyond her reach. She spoke her mind in rooms where she had once remained silent. And each time she did, she felt the quiet satisfaction of alignment, the feeling that comes when your actions finally match your worth. What surprised her most was how little bitterness she carried. She had expected anger to fuel her transformation, but anger had faded long before empowerment arrived. What drove her now was clarity. She understood what she had tolerated. She understood why she had waited. And most importantly, she understood what she would never accept again. Forgiveness, she realized, is not about excusing the past. It is about refusing to let it dictate the future. Somewhere during that fourth year, the apology she once needed stopped being a requirement. It did not stop being deserved, but it stopped being necessary for her to move forward. That distinction mattered. She no longer rehearsed conversations in her head, no longer imagined what she would say if he finally appeared. If he did come, she decided, it would be on different terms, not as the woman who waited, but as the woman who chose. She built a life that could stand without explanation. And in doing so, she unknowingly set the stage for the most profound reversal of all. Because while she was becoming whole, he was beginning to unravel in ways even he could no longer ignore. The fourth year was the year she stopped needing his regret, and the year he began to feel the absence he had dismissed for too long. She did not know it yet, but the power dynamic had already shifted. The waiting was over. The balance had changed. And when fate finally brought them back into the same room, it would not be her heart that trembled. It would be his. The fifth year did not announce itself with drama. It arrived the way fate often does, quietly, almost carelessly, slipping into her life on an ordinary afternoon she had not marked as significant. She had stopped counting by then. Time no longer felt like something she owed him. And yet when she received the invitation, formal, understated, unmistakably tied to his world, something in her paused, not her heart, her memory. The past rose gently, like a tide she had already learned how to stand against. She read the card once, then set it aside without urgency. She would go, not because she hoped for anything, but because she no longer feared what she might feel. He was not expecting her. That much was clear the moment she entered the room. He stood near the center of it all, as he always had, confident posture, familiar authority, speaking with people who nodded at the right moments. Then his gaze lifted and the rhythm of his world broke. It was subtle, only a fraction of a second, but she saw it. The way his expression faltered before he recovered. The way his certainty slipped just briefly, as if something essential had been removed from beneath his feet. She did not slow her steps. She did not seek him out. She simply moved forward with calm assurance, greeting others with ease, belonging there without needing to prove it. He watched her. For the first time in 5 years, he truly looked. She was not the woman who had waited. There was no trace of quiet pleading in her posture, no careful restraint meant to keep peace. She spoke confidently, laughed when she chose, listened with interest rather than expectation. People gravitated toward her, not out of curiosity but respect. And as he stood there, surrounded by noise that suddenly felt distant, he understood with unsettling clarity that the balance had shifted while he was not paying attention. She had not returned diminished. She had returned transformed. The realization unsettled him more than anger ever could. Regret surfaced, not sharply but steadily building with each passing moment. He remembered the night she left, how easily he had let her go. He remembered telling himself she would be fine, that waiting had been her choice. Watching her now, independent and composed, he understood the lie he had wrapped around that belief. She had not waited because she was weak. She had waited because she was loyal. And when loyalty went unrecognized, she had learned how to survive without it. Their eyes met only once. It lasted no longer than a breath. But in that brief exchange, everything he had avoided for 5 years rose to the surface. Memory, guilt, realization. She did not smile. She did not look away. She acknowledged him the way one acknowledges the past, with awareness, not attachment. And then she turned back to the conversation she was in, leaving him standing alone with the truth he had delayed for too long. He tried to speak to her that evening, tried to approach casually as if time had not reshaped everything. But every attempt felt wrong. Too late. Too thin. The confidence he once wore effortlessly now faltered under the weight of everything unsaid. He realized with growing unease that an apology spoken lightly would not survive the woman she had become. She noticed his hesitation and felt nothing she needed to suppress. The power of that surprised her. 5 years ago, his attention, or lack of it, had shaped her nights. Now his discomfort barely registered. She did not avoid him out of spite. She did not seek him out of curiosity. She simply existed, whole and grounded, unaffected by the man who had once defined too much of her world. That indifference was not cruelty. It was freedom. When he finally approached her, it was not with words, but with presence. He stood beside her quietly, waiting for a moment that felt appropriate. When she turned, he spoke her name carefully, as if unsure whether he still had the right to say it. She looked at him then, fully, without resentment or warmth, only clarity. He saw it in her eyes. She was not there for closure. She was not there for him. He began to speak. At first, the words sounded like explanation. He caught himself mid-sentence and stopped. Explanation was what he had offered himself for years. It was no longer enough. He swallowed, then tried again, slower, more honestly. He spoke of time, of mistakes, of how things had unraveled in ways he had not anticipated. He did not yet say he was sorry. He knew better now. An apology that arrives 5 years late does not begin with regret. It begins with humility. She listened without interruption. There was no tension in her posture, no guardedness in her expression. She had already survived the waiting. This moment could not hurt her. That knowledge steadied her in ways nothing else could. When he finished speaking, unfinished, uncertain, she did not respond immediately. Silence settled between them, not heavy but deliberate. And in that silence, he understood something he had never considered before. The apology he owed her was no longer about what he had done. It was about what he had failed to do for 5 years. He had not only humiliated her, he had let time pass without accountability. He had allowed her suffering to exist in isolation. And now, standing before the woman she had become, he realized the truth he could no longer avoid. If forgiveness ever came, it would not come easily. And it would not come for free. He chose the moment carefully, or at least he believed he did. A quiet corner away from the crowd, late enough that the evening's noise had softened, but early enough that dignity could still be preserved. 5 years earlier, he would have spoken without hesitation, confident that words alone could repair what had broken. Now, standing before her, he felt the unfamiliar weight of restraint. For the first time in his life, he was aware that speaking too soon might do more harm than silence ever had. "I owe you an apology," he said at last. The words hung between them, fragile and insufficient. He waited for them to land to provoke something, anger, relief, recognition. Instead, she remained still. Not cold, not defensive, simply attentive the way one listens when deciding whether something is worth believing. He continued, mistaking her quiet for permission. He spoke of misunderstanding, of timing, of how complicated things had been back then. He spoke of pressure, of expectations, of the way life had carried him forward faster than he realized. He admitted that he should have handled things differently, that he regretted the way she had been spoken about that night, that he never meant for her to be hurt so deeply. The apology was carefully constructed, polite, remorseful, safe. It was the kind of apology that looks sincere from a distance. But distance was the one thing she no longer lived in. As he spoke, she listened with the same calm presence she had mastered over the years. She did not interrupt. She did not correct him. She allowed his words to finish forming before she responded, not because she owed him courtesy, but because she respected herself enough to be deliberate. When he finally stopped, his eyes searched her face for relief. She exhaled softly, then met his gaze. "That was not an apology," she said, gently but firmly. The statement struck him harder than accusation ever could. She did not raise her voice. She did not list his failures. She simply explained. An apology, she told him, does not center the comfort of the person offering it. It does not dilute harm with circumstance. And it does not arrive years late carrying explanations meant to soften responsibility. She reminded him, calmly, clearly, that 5 years ago he had not merely hurt her. He had erased her publicly, then allowed time to do the rest of the damage for him. "You spoke about what it was like for you," she said. "You didn't speak about what it did to me." He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. She continued, not unkindly. She told him about the first year, the nights she waited for something that never came. The second year when silence hardened into understanding. The years after that when she learned how to live without waiting. She did not accuse him of ruining her life. She did something far more unsettling. She told him that she had survived it, that his absence had not destroyed her, that his apology, if it was meant to relieve his guilt, had arrived far too late to matter in the way he hoped. The truth of that unsettled him deeply. He had imagined this moment differently. He had imagined regret spoken aloud would immediately shift something, that forgiveness would soften her, that the past could be acknowledged and then gently set aside. What he had not imagined was standing before someone who no longer needed anything from him. "You waited for 5 years," he said quietly, as if the words alone proved something. She shook her head, a small, almost sad smile touching her lips. "No," she replied. "I waited for 2, after that I lived." That sentence did what 5 years of silence could not. It stripped him of illusion. He realized then that his apology had been shaped by his need for absolution, not her need for justice. He had come prepared to say sorry, but not prepared to confront the full weight of what he had done. Not prepared to acknowledge that forgiveness, if it came at all, would not be a transaction. It would be a reckoning. She was not angry. That was the most unsettling part. Anger would have meant she was still bound to the moment he broke her. Calm meant she had moved beyond it. And standing there, watching her exist without the gravity of his regret pulling at her, he felt something dangerously close to panic. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly now. She considered the question. 5 years ago, the answer would have come easily. An apology, a confession, public acknowledgement, something, anything that proved she had not waited in vain. Now the answer required thought. "I don't want anything," she said finally. "That's the difference." The words landed with finality. She explained that forgiveness is not something offered to ease discomfort. It is something earned through accountability, through time, through changed behavior, through humility that persists even when no reward is guaranteed. She told him that if he was seeking forgiveness, he would need to understand one thing clearly. She was no longer the woman who waited. If he wanted her forgiveness, he would not receive it through words. He would receive it through action, through patience, through accepting that she might never give it at all. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. For the first time since she had known him, he said nothing. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He did not try to reclaim control of the narrative. He stood there, absorbing the reality that the apology he had rehearsed was not enough, and that the forgiveness he wanted was no longer his to expect. She turned to leave, not abruptly, not dramatically, simply finished. As she walked away, she felt something she had not expected. Relief. She had not rejected him out of cruelty. She had rejected the apology because it did not honor the years she had carried alone. And for the first time, she understood the power of her own boundaries. Behind her, he remained still, finally grasping the truth that would change everything. If he wanted her forgiveness, he would have to beg for it. Not with words, but with proof. He did not sleep that night. Sleep requires peace, and peace was something he had not earned. The conversation replayed itself relentlessly, her calm voice, her steady gaze, the way she had dismantled his apology without ever raising her own. What unsettled him most was not rejection, but clarity. She had not been cruel. She had not even been unkind. She had simply refused to absolve him on demand. For years, he had controlled outcomes with confidence and timing. Now, for the first time, the outcome was no longer his to shape. That realization stripped him of something essential: certainty. In the days that followed, he tried to proceed as though nothing had changed. Meetings continued. Obligations demanded attention. His life from the outside appeared untouched. Yet internally, something had fractured. Every success felt hollow, every conversation incomplete. He found himself listening for her voice where it no longer belonged, noticing the absence of the woman who once softened his edges without effort. It was not longing that consumed him, it was reckoning. He had underestimated not only her strength, but the cost of losing it. For the first time, he understood what begging truly meant. Begging was not kneeling or pleading. It was the slow surrender of pride. It was the willingness to endure discomfort without demanding relief. It was continuing to show up even when there was no guarantee of reward. And so he began, not with grand gestures, but with humility so quiet it startled even him. He corrected the story he had allowed to stand for 5 years. When her name surfaced in conversation, he no longer dismissed it. He did not allow half-truths to linger. He spoke plainly, admitting fault without embellishment, acknowledging the public humiliation he had caused without softening it with explanation. At first, people reacted with surprise, then with curiosity, then with respect. Accountability, he learned, has a gravity all its own. Each admission cost him comfort, but it restored something far more valuable: integrity. She heard about it indirectly. Not through him. He did not contact her. He had understood that much at least. Begging for forgiveness did not mean invading her space. It meant respecting it. She learned of his actions through others: quiet remarks, unexpected honesty, the subtle correction of a narrative that had once painted her as foolish for waiting. She felt no rush of triumph, only recognition. This was different. This was work. Still, she did not move toward him. Power once reclaimed is not surrendered easily. Weeks passed, then months. He continued without acknowledgement. He supported causes she cared about without attaching his name to them. He repaired damages he had once ignored. He accepted consequences without complaint. And when praise came for these changes, he redirected it. This was not redemption theater. This was discipline. For the first time, she allowed herself to watch more closely. She noticed consistency, not perfection, but persistence. He did not ask her to see him differently. He allowed time to do what words could not. And slowly, something unexpected began to surface within her: not hope, but curiosity; not desire, but assessment. She had learned too well the danger of mistaking intent for change. The moment he finally spoke to her again, it was brief and unguarded. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said quietly, standing a respectful distance away. "I'm asking you to believe that I understand why you might never do so." There was no defense in his tone, no expectation. That was the moment she recognized the shift. Begging, she realized, is not loud. It is patient. It does not demand a response. It accepts silence as an answer. And in that acceptance, something within her softened, not toward him, but toward the idea that justice had finally been acknowledged. She told him the truth then, not all of it, but enough. She told him forgiveness, if it ever came, would not erase the past. It would not return the years she had waited. It would not undo the humiliation. Forgiveness, she said, would only mean she no longer carried the weight of his actions with her into the future. And if he wanted that gift, because that was what it would be, a gift, he would need to understand one final thing. She was no longer proving anything to him. If he wished to remain in her life in any form, it would be as someone who stood beside her choices, not above them. Someone who accepted boundaries without resentment. Someone who could sit with discomfort without trying to resolve it prematurely. He listened, and in that listening, she saw the man he could have been 5 years ago, had he been brave enough to apologize then. The irony was not lost on her. Time had done what pride had prevented. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine forgiveness, not as reconciliation, but as closure shaped on her terms. The power was not in making him suffer. It was in deciding whether he would be allowed to move forward at all. She did not decide that day. Power does not rush decisions. It waits until certainty replaces urgency. And somewhere in that waiting, not the old waiting, but a deliberate, chosen pause, she understood the final transformation had already occurred. She no longer waited for his apology. He waited for her forgiveness. Forgiveness did not arrive with ceremony. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful confession beneath chandeliers or witnesses to mark the moment. When it finally came, it arrived quietly, on an afternoon so ordinary it almost felt unworthy of what it would close. She had learned over the years that the most powerful decisions rarely announce themselves. They simply settle into place when you are ready to live with them. She asked to meet him on her terms. Not in his world, not in the places where memory still carried echoes of humiliation. They met in a simple, open space, away from status and performance, where nothing about the setting could lend him authority. When he arrived, he did not dress for impression. He did not bring words prepared to persuade. He came the way one comes when they understand that the outcome is no longer theirs to control. She noticed that. They spoke slowly, without urgency. 5 years of distance had stripped their conversation of illusion. There was no need to revisit every detail of the past. They both knew it too well. Instead, she spoke of the woman she had been, the one who waited, who believed patience could substitute for respect, who mistook silence for strength. She spoke without bitterness, because bitterness would have kept her tethered to the hurt. She told him that those years had changed her, not by breaking her, but by teaching her the cost of self-erasure. He listened without interruption. When he spoke, he did not ask for forgiveness. He did not frame his regret as transformation completed. He acknowledged the harm without defending it. He named the humiliation for what it had been. He admitted that time had not lessened his responsibility, it had only clarified it. And when he finished, he said something he had never said before. "I would understand if you never forgive me." That sentence mattered more than any apology he had offered before. She felt it then, not relief, not triumph, but resolution. Forgiveness, she realized, was no longer about him. It was about what she wanted to carry forward. She had already reclaimed her power. She had already rewritten her identity. Holding on to resentment now would not protect her. It would only weigh her down. And yet, forgiveness would not be given cheaply. It would not be offered as reconciliation, nor as permission to reclaim what had been lost. "I forgive you," she said finally. The words were calm, grounded, unnegotiable. Forgiveness, she explained, did not mean forgetting. It did not mean returning to what once was. It did not mean restoring trust without proof. It meant she was done carrying the injury into the future. It meant the years she had waited no longer defined her. It meant she could close the chapter without reopening herself to harm. He accepted that. Not with disappointment, not with insistence, with respect. They parted without promises, without expectations. The story they once shared did not restart, it concluded. And for the first time, that ending felt complete. She walked away without looking back, not because she needed distance, but because she no longer needed validation. Later, alone, she reflected on the 5 years she had once believed were wasted. They were not. They were the years that taught her patience without self-sacrifice, strength without silence, love without erasure. She had waited for an apology, and when it finally came, she had discovered she no longer needed it to heal. What she needed was the power to decide what forgiveness meant. And she had claimed it. For him, the lesson would last far longer. He had learned that apologies delayed do not diminish. They accumulate weight. That forgiveness is not earned by time, but by accountability. And that when you make someone wait for acknowledgement, you risk meeting them again as someone who no longer needs you at all. As for her, she stepped into the rest of her life unburdened. She was no longer the woman who waited 5 years for an apology. She was the woman who received it and chose what it was worth.